Hi, my name is Dan Schneider. I'm the executive director of the Florence Belsky Charitable Foundation, also known as Flobel. I would love to introduce one of our top advisors. He was born in LA, raised in New York, and he is a graduate of NYU Tisch in film. He's been in the film industry for over 25 years, and that is Dan Halpern. Thank you, Dan.
Well, thanks, Dan. And I want to introduce my good friend and colleague and live television director extraordinaire, Ken A. Ken has been directing live television, music, and sports for over 25 years. And he has probably worked on maybe more festivals than almost any television director in the country. Lollapalooza, Coachella, what else am I? Oh, what's the big one in Tennessee? Bonnaroo, and a whole host of other things with literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of music artists, almost all of them everybody out here has heard of at one point or another in their life. And without that, Ken, thank you very much for being with us today. And I wanted to start out with everybody knows what a regular feature film director, episodic television director does, but a lot of people don't know what a live multi-camera television director uh, does. Can you explain that to our audience?
I often, well, uh, uh, it's hard to describe it to people, but I often say it's like eating a cupcake while juggling while rolling on a log. It's like it is an all-consuming experience where essentially I am in charge of shaping the vision for whatever event I'm covering with a multitude of cameras and trying to balance the needs of, say, the client, whether it be like a YouTube or an Amazon, and the viewer at home. So, in other words, what does the client need seen or shown, and what does the fan at home really want to see? And so, what I'm doing is I'm sitting usually in a truck or a control room of some sort, and I have done preparation up to that point that I've arrived to direct. So I've learned the songs, I've learned about the artists, and then what I do is that I've laid out my cameras in an arrangement where I can get all the elements that I need to get, and then I proceed to essentially, once the show starts, there's no stopping, it's live, we just go, and I'm essentially cutting the show so that the people at home are experiencing it hopefully as close to as possible in that medium as someone seeing it live in the room. At least that's the objective.
Right. And so I guess also a lot of people who are watching us now understand that in the film world, a director is in charge of the entire vision of every department.
Right.
But in
Right.
television world, it's especially live multi-camera, it's somewhat different. Can you explain how it's bifurcated, how what authority or responsibilities most producers or showrunners have, and where do you at what point do you step in to impart your vision?
Well, it's different on every project. It depends on your executive producer. Starts at the top, whether they are a particularly creative person or if they're more of a numbers person, or it all depends on that. But as far as where I come in, once the say the venue or the artist or the need has been identified, I'm pretty early in the process, because what they want to do is that, so I'll say, for example, early on, scout the venue to see the venue, and that will be along with the line producer, someone like yourself, involved in that. And then from there, what I'll do is I'll look at the venue, I'll figure out, obviously with the budget and the producer, what we can accommodate as far as equipment is concerned, what the space can accommodate as far as equipment is concerned. And then from there, what I do is I go about planning with usually a director of photography or an engineer or someone like that, my camera package. And then, I go into planning out what the show is going to look like. I mean, I use some previs sometimes. A lot of times I use what's in my head. I was a model builder as a kid. I love to draw. So
Can
I'm
you
very
explain to the audience what pre-visualization is?
Oh, sure. Pre-visualization is where you're either drawing it by hand or you're using a computer program to illustrate what the shots should look like. In other words, what if you're going to have a certain camera at a certain angle with a specific lens on it, you want to make sure that you can get the shot that you need to get with that camera, with that lens. So that's the important thing. So if you've got a 70mm camera and it's going to be flying in on a 35-foot arm across a frame or across in front of an artist, you've got to make sure that you can actually see the person in the way they need to be seen, or the way you've envisioned that need to be seen. So again, a lot of times we rely on software to do that, or you know, a lot of times, especially at festivals and things like that, where there's zero planning. You know, it's like you're just doing it in the moment. You're making choices in the moment, and you're relying on your camera operators to interpret for you, because they're the ones who are out on stage in front of the act, essentially seeing it firsthand.
Right. And so when you were a kid,
Yeah.
teenager in college, is this something that you wanted to do? Was it something you just sort of fell into? Was it accidental?
Yeah.
Was it organic? What's your story? What's your origin story?
Well, okay, so I'm an only child of divorce. Spent a lot of time on my own, a lot of time traveling. Loved film, loved building models as a kid. Was very into music. Was always very musical, but a failure at like guitar playing and things like that. Like I didn't have that gene or I didn't develop it until much later. But I always had a passion for music, and I always had a passion for performing. I was a theater nerd as a kid. Loved musicals and things like that. But I spent a lot of time as a child watching movies, watching film, especially the classic era stuff. So everything from Abbott and Costello to John Ford, and I mean, everything in between. It was like that was my childhood. And it was interesting because I never thought about directing. I never thought about, like, I remember seeing Star Wars in 1977. It was the day after my birthday, my 10th birthday. And it was amazing because I was completely in the story. I didn't think about, like, I wanted to be a director. That didn't come till much later. So essentially all through my childhood, through high school, etc., I knew I wanted to perform, and I knew I wanted to be in front of the camera. And what happened is that in my first year of college, I actually got a job at a public television station in Denver. Initially, it was to host a show, but they made you learn how to become a broadcast engineer as an internship beforehand. Now, I didn't know television. I had no idea. I worked a little bit in music. I had worked as a PA on sets and on concerts and things like that, but I had never worked in television. I just knew I wanted to be in front of the camera because I just like to talk, and I like to talk to people, and I like to talk about music. And so the interesting thing about it was the fact that I did my 6 months there, and then I got hired as the host of a music video show on this alternative public television station in Denver. And that was 1986. I did that on and off until 1991. And that's when I learned production. I started to learn production, mostly single cam, doing interviews and things like that. Not so much multicam, but in the process of that, I was also DJing. So again, it was all about being on the mic or being in front of the camera. And after I graduated from college, I wanted to I left television. I worked in radio for a while as a DJ. I was on a station in Chicago. And I moved up to Madison, Wisconsin to play in a band with somebody and to work at a radio station up here. And it just so happened that everything fell through. And I knew someone at the public television station, and I got back into public television. And again, that's where I learned multi-camera. And I remember the first day I set foot on a set. It was for a show called Sewing with Nancy. And I was the floor manager for that show. Like, that was my first thing I did. And I looked at all the people, like I looked at the cameras, and I looked at the floor manager, and I looked at all the people and saw the control room and everything. And I looked at the hierarchy, and I said, okay, I want to be at the top of this hierarchy. I want to be the person. But I realized I had a long way to go. Like, I had a lot to learn. And also the other thing is that I noticed that once I started running camera, which it wasn't too long that I moved up from floor manager to running camera, that I quickly realized that at least I thought, I mean, this was youthful exuberance and, bit of ego. I thought I knew better than everybody else how to frame it, how to shoot it, how to do it. Oh, you've got to do it this way, etc. And so that's where I suddenly developed the passion to become a director. So that was 1991, 1992. And then it was like everything sort of made sense to me. Everything I started watching, whether it be a bootleg videotape of REM on a German television show from 1985, or it was sports, or it was a news show, or, something like that. I mean, it could be the 6 a.m. crop report, but I mean, it was one of those things that I started noticing the angles, I started noticing the framing, I started noticing the pace, the anticipation, when you cut, when you dissolve, things like that. And that became my passion, and it still is to this day.
So when you started out on that music video program, either there or when you went and worked on, was it Sewing with Sally, or what's the name of the show?
Sewing with Nancy.
Sewing with
Yeah.
Nancy.
Nancy Zeman, God bless her.
But in either one of these experiences, did you meet anybody, maybe an older technician or older director, producer, that sort of brought you under their wing and showed you the ropes and became sort of a mentor to you?
Well, it's funny because there were people, various people along the way. There were some people that were, there was one guy in particular who was a grip, a gaffer, camera operator, sort of Mr. All-Arounder type. And I would say,
again,
yeah.
Okay, explain really quickly, what does a gaffer do?
Oh, well, it depends. Well, a gaffer is someone who deals with the electrics on set, who deals with lighting, who deals with, things like that. The grip deals with lighting as well, So these were people that I was around because I was working behind the camera, and I was still doing in front of the camera stuff, but I was really focused on learning how to be a director. I would actually what I would do is I would pick mentors that were at the next step of my evolution. So if I was a floor director and I wanted to be a camera operator, I would befriend a camera operator and learn from them. And then I would befriend a technical director and learn from them. And then in the process, I would also always be paying attention to what the producer was doing, what the director was doing. And I mean, this is the best advice I ever got was talk less, listen more. And that's especially the case when you're developing something like that, or you're learning, you've discovered your passion, but you need to really knuckle down.
You're a very passionate, talkative guy.
I am, but I mean, and I'm not saying I did it right. I didn't take my own advice. I'm not saying that. I mean,
I know what you mean.
Way. I certainly can tell you stories about talking my way out of jobs as much as I talked my way in. But I mean, but that's the other thing is that I did have people along the way, and honestly, there were people along the way too that said, I said, I want to be a producer and director. I remember this conversation very clearly in 1995. I was talking to a bunch of senior members at the public television station. And the thing is that they said to me, well, what do you want to do? Like the door was opening. Here's the potential. Here's, what do you want to do? Where do you want to, as you step through the doorway, what is it you want to become? And I said, I want to be a producer director. And they went, you need to pick one. You can't be both. But that was the world in 1994, 1995 in broadcast television and public television. You weren't wearing multiple hats. You were that one thing, and you did that one thing, and that was it.
And we're going to get to that later on. We're going to talk about how everything's much different towards the end. But so let me, I guess the other question though is like looking back at your experience, and I know everybody is different, but overall, from the time somebody graduates, say college, they're 21 years old, to the time they get into a position of being, say, a young director, right? How many years do you think a person legitimately has to have experience working their way up to get to that point? I know it's kind of a loaded question because this day and age is different.
Yeah.
But in general,
I can tell you how I did it, where I thought I had to spend, like sometimes I thought I had to spend a year learning, like under someone. There are other times I felt like I should have spent 5 years under someone learning. But because like I've always had a good sense of where I need to go and how to get there. And I also had a very good sense of my timeline and how much time I needed to spend in it. And there were I didn't need to be a floor manager forever. I could figure out how to do floor managing pretty easy, doing makeup, getting people water, giving cues under the camera, that sort of stuff. That was pretty simple. But like technical director, I mean, oh my gosh, technical director. I mean, that's a lifetime pursuit for some people. And I mean, it's an amazingly difficult profession. And I did not spend enough time doing that. And I was
explain to the audience what a technical director does.
Sure. A technical director, it's on entertainment and sports inside the control room or inside the truck. there is usually a device called a switcher, and on that device are a number of buttons, and all those buttons represent a different thing that can be put on the screen at any given time. So it could be a graphic, like a full screen coming up next, or it could be a camera angle, or it could be, it could be essentially anything. So that the technical director is essentially he sits next to the director, and he listens to what the director says, and then he makes it occur on the screen for the viewer at home. So he's the last line of control, essentially, before the signal goes out.
And how long were you a technical director?
Well, I still do it from time to time, but I'm very limited. It's one of those things where I like to keep my hands in it because it keeps my head in it, and it keeps me current on the technology as technology changes. So I still do it from time to time. I do some consulting as well regarding it. But I was a technical director primarily between, it was the early 2000s. So as I was transitioning, because I realized, especially with sports, learning to direct sports, the best sports directors I've ever seen were great technical directors. Because they knew the flow of the show, and they also understood how everything came into the truck, and the different stations involved, whether it be a graphics person or a replay person or something like that. They understood all the elements and how all the elements came together. And if you know how that works, it's much easier for you then to call it quickly in the heat of the moment, which is sports, and call it quickly and accurately, so that everyone down the chain of command understands what you're talking about.
And who was that first person that gave you your shot to direct?
I did.
What's that?
I did it myself.
Oh, you gave your own shot.
Yeah, I had to. I got pat. Well, here's the thing. It's like, so I was at public television in the 90s, and I did 3 years of pledge breaks and crop reports, at 7 a.m, single cam stuff, 3 camera stuff, like everything. But again, you need to do this. I honestly believe that you need to be competent, to be good. You need to see as much variety as possible. And finally, what happened was that there was a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation funded project that I was on in 1998 called Safe Night USA. And I was hired as the associate producer, but I was hoping that I was going to be able to direct. We were doing 4 satellite transmissions, essentially, with BET in Washington, D.C. as the hub. And without getting too much into the weeds on it, I got passed over, or I felt I got passed over. So that's when I left public television, and I borrowed some money from family and stuff, and I essentially made my own first show. And that's a long story in and of itself. But it was one of those things where I hired the truck, I hired the crew, I hired everybody down the line, so I was in charge of the budget, and I also directed it. I had I did all the artist relations, I did all the clearances, I essentially did everything myself. This is 1999, and on the other side of it, I also had a plan for duplication on the back end and selling it via this thing called the internet and Amazon.com, which was still new back then. And in the end, the whole thing collapsed because the artist and his management pulled out. And so literally in my basement, I have, $10,000 worth of tape and recorded medium, et cetera, from this lesson. I refer to it, people often say to me, well, how do you feel about it, et cetera? I say, it's the greatest student film no one's ever seen. It's like, because but that gave me an entree. This is going to be a recurring theme throughout everything I talk about. It's like every failure or every success is another opportunity, always. So, for example, when I was having trouble with this artist and his legal team, I consulted a lawyer here in Madison, Wisconsin, where I live, and that lawyer happened to work with a band that at the time was signed and was very popular, and he introduced me to them, and they said, oh, we need somebody to shoot a concert. And I said, that's great.
And what band was that?
Garbage.
Oh, sure.
So it was like, so they were based in Madison at the time. They had a number of shows. The label wanted some stuff shot. Q Prime, their management, wanted some stuff shot. So I had to put together. So again, I produced and directed a multi-camera shoot. Now this time, instead of like the previous thing that I had done, I didn't have a truck. I had to do it all wild, and then sync it up later. So I had to get the soundboard mix, and I had to do, it was all that stuff. So every opportunity, like I just want to go back for a second. All the things I experienced in the 3 or 4 years that I was at public television, like I took notes. Like I paid attention very closely to everything. And I made sure that, like, I was also, during that time when I was working, I was freelancing for the networks. I was doing sports freelance. I was doing other stuff too. But it all led to that moment of me having that first show and being able to do all the things from soup to nuts, from start to finish, from the budget, doing the budget to it, to editing it, and then having the whole thing collapse and going through the legal issues involved with that. I learned all that. That next thing led me to working with Garbage and doing some videos for them, and meanwhile, to pay the bills, I was working as a freelance camera operator, and I was doing sports for the networks, doing football, doing golf, things like that. I was, it never stopped. I was just constantly, again, rolling that log while juggling and eating a cupcake, just trying to keep the momentum up and going. And
so let's talk about, like, there, because you're kind of unusual that as a director, and I think it's good to explain to the audience about how most TV directors sort of specialize in one area, right? And that you kind of do go back between sports and music, live music. And
right.
How do you think what's the approach, how you approach each one differently?
Oh boy. Well, in some ways, I think some people I work with would say that I do them too much alike. But it's like the way I cut a music show sometimes is the way I cut sports, and vice versa. But part of the reason that I had to do sports, was because that was what was available in the Midwest. I mean, there's not a huge entertainment business here. We've got Chicago, we've got Minneapolis, but these smaller markets, they can't sustain a large entertainment business. So there wasn't a chance. Like, if I wanted to go out and shoot a band, or I wanted to produce something, I had to find an outlet for it first, obviously. And then I had to go and I had to do the budget, do all the stuff, and then go shoot it. Or a label. I was doing a lot of label work. Like, if they came into this market and say they were going to shoot a live concert, and a famous director like Wayne Isham was working on it, who worked with Metallica and all these heavy metal bands, they would call me because I was the local guy, and I would come in and I would run camera, or I would do something, I would be involved in some way. But so getting back to your question, for me personally, sports was like all I had sometimes to pay the bills. So I learned to do it. So I started as a camera operator. I became a technical director because there was a need. And then obviously I became a director. And then the concert thing happened because, I worked my way into directing festivals at the time that festivals were starting to be streamed in the early 2000s.
And what was that first entree into the festival world?
Oh my God. Well, yeah, this is a long story. So I'll try to sum it up as best I can. Right. When I was a student in college, I worked the first Lollapalooza as a production assistant. Okay. So that's 1991. Fast forward to 2004, and Lollapalooza is coming back in Chicago. And I'm kind of like, I'm not directing as much as I want. I'm kind of desperate to find a new directing gig. And I think, geez, do I still know anybody connected with Lollapalooza that I met back in 1991? So I called tour managers. I called people, people I hadn't talked to in, 14 years. And they eventually, what happens is that I find out who the video production company is for Lollapalooza 2004 in Grant Park in Chicago. And I start bugging the guy who's the producer of the video production, and he pretty much, like, I spent a month like calling every day, and he finally said to me, "Hey, I can't get you on this, but if you want to come to Austin City Limits, you can work as a local, and you can direct the third stage, because we have two other directors, one of them being the guy that directs Austin City Limits, the TV show, Gary Minotti, who has been sort of a mentor to me over the years." And he said, "But you'll have to pay your way down there. You'll have to find a place to sleep, etc. But if you can do it, come on down. And I had sent him a reel by that point, and which he described to me many years later as the worst reel he ever saw. But he still hired me. And the thing was, is that I arrived as, they called me the kid. I was probably 30 something at that point, but I was the youngest director they had there. And my style was completely different than the other directors. My take on the music was completely different. Also, all those bands were in my wheelhouse. Like, I knew all the acts, and I understood it all. So I knew exactly when the downbeat was going to hit, and that we needed to have a shot of the snare drum at this point in the song, or when the singer was going to sing. It was that sort of thing. So I just want to circle back your question about directing sports versus directing music. Honestly, they're very much alike. There is an ebb and flow to sports, that there is an ebb and flow to music as well. There is only so much story that you can create before you go into either one of them. In other words, there's oftentimes, there are meetings the week before a sporting event where you have the producers meeting, the directors meetings, and they kind of set the storyline and what they think the matchup is going to be, the opponents versus each other. When you go in to see a band, there's going to be a storyline of, if the band is if they're a really cool band and the fans love them, or if they're a band that's, squabbling with each other, there's different things. And then there's also the requirements of how you shoot them, whether the league wants you to shoot in a certain way or the band wants you to shoot in a certain way. They want things shown, they don't want things shown. There's things like that. So in a lot of ways, it comes down to, in the moment you're directing it, being able to read and react to the situation and translate it for the viewer at home. And so with music, it's about that dynamic of the singer or the artist presenting their work, showing it in the context of the show that they and their designers have created, showing it to the audience at home to make them feel like they're there. And then also including the audience that's there in the venue sometimes and showing them for reaction. With sports, it's the same sort of thing. You're presenting the action. If a certain moment goes by that needs to be seen again, you replay that. These days, a lot of those sports shows are very graphic intensive. So you've got all these extra storylines or all these extra things that you have to add into the show. You don't have that in live music. Live music, it's like you're watching the band and that's it. You're cutting to the music. You make sure you get the guitar solo, etc. With sports, it's like, here's the star player. Just like there's the star guitar player, there's the star, center on the Milwaukee Bucks, Giannis Antetokounmpo. You want to make sure that, you've always got a camera on him because he's going to do something amazing. So, in a lot of ways, they're very similar. I honestly think, from my mind, they're very rhythm based. And you have to be in tune to that rhythm, I think, to present them in the best way possible.
And so what are the other festivals that you've worked on in the last 15 years? And I know you've worked on a lot.
Oh my God.
Repeat business.
This is the least humble brag I could ever drop.
That's okay.
One of the only 5 outside non-BBC directors to ever direct at the Glastonbury Festival in England. And Glastonbury is like the oldest, biggest music festival. Coachella is based on Glastonbury's example. And it is, the BBC is very, very, very reluctant to let anybody sit in the chair besides their approved people. And I was able to go over there with Jack White and do it. And then I was able to go over there with LCD Sound System and direct on the BBC. So if you see the shows that are online, all of the stuff I've directed, a lot of it's on YouTube already because other people have put it up or the BBC has put it up. That's the work I'm most proud of. But I mean, I've directed, like you said earlier, at Coachella, at Lollapalooza. I mean, I started at Lollapalooza in 2005, or Austin City Limits in 2005, Lollapalooza in 2006, Coachella in 2007, Bonnaroo shortly thereafter, probably, and then I've been doing all those festivals since. And for a long time, I was the main stage director who, as well as my directing duties, kind of set the overall look of the show with the executive producer. And then from there, it's like I've directed at Fuji Rock in Japan. I've directed at Byron Bay at the festival in Australia. I've directed, all over Europe, like every major festival in Europe I've directed at.
And then there's the pinnacle. Well, one of the pinnacles, I think, of your career is Paul McCartney.
Yeah,
Talk a little about that.
yeah. Well, that's a funny story, because I wasn't cast originally as the director, but in the moment I became the director because, the other two directors that they had kind of didn't step up or had an issue, and so they looked at me and said, "You got to do it." Yeah, Paul McCartney played at Grand Central Station a couple of years ago for the release of his Egypt Station album. And I mean, to do anything at Grand Central Station in New York City is an amazing opportunity because it's a national landmark. And I was hired originally as the vision mixer, which is the fancy term that the Europeans use for technical director.
Right.
So so that was the thing was I was hired as the vision mixer, but the director that they had hired had never done multi-camera before, and the other director they brought over from France didn't speak English. So literally the first song, everybody's looking around going, I'm sitting there with my fingers on the buttons and I'm kind of cutting the show, but I'm looking around going, okay, who's calling this thing? And all I hear is squabbling in the back row from the producers. And finally the executive producer walks up to me and goes, "You're directing the show, go." And there I was, first song in, directing Paul McCartney. So it's like, I mean, and that's, okay, but here's the thing, going back to my childhood, I was a huge Beatles fan. I mean, that is right. As we all, at some point or another, we encounter the Beatles and we either we don't care or we fall in love with them. I fell in love with them. And so anything he was going to play that night, I was going to know. And and on top of that, all of those camera operators were going to know those songs too. And so all I had to do was say to them, okay, this is your assignment. This is the area you're covering. You're covering this guitar player, camera left. You're covering this guitar player, camera right. You're covering Paul. One rule about Paul, you never shoot him in profile. You always shoot him kind of dead on or 3/4, but you never shoot him hard profile. Little things like that you learn, and again, it's all that experience that I had through years of shooting music all lead up into that moment where I'm completely comfortable. I've gotten a Battlefield promotion and I'm completely comfortable with taking the reins and creating it in the moment. And again, it's about then, what does the Paul McCartney fan or the Beatles fan at home want to see on this YouTube webcast? What do they want to see? You want to make sure you show Paul every time he sings. If he plays a bass lick or a guitar lick, you want to make sure you show that. If there's lead guitars or drum fills or background vocals and other stuff, that's not as important as seeing Paul, but it's important, So, I mean, again, these are all the things that go through your mind in the moment, almost subconsciously. It can't happen consciously because you're sitting there going, ready, camera one, little to the right, take one, ready, camera two, etc. But all of that sort of inner dialogue or subconscious, you've already prepped that. That's through years of experience,
Yes.
all that.
So I guess the other question is as you got into the touring world and the festival world, was there anybody as you got older that became a mentor in that world to you?
Indirectly, there is a guy who I am great friends with. I've been friends with since 1995. His name is Josh Adams. And he's a couple of years younger than me. He is the touring video director for the Foo Fighters. And when I met him, he was new. He had just graduated from college and he got into the business working for Tina Turner. And then he knew the director, Tina Turner's touring director. And then he went to work for the Beastie Boys. And he's like, and I would see him, or I would kind of, we were good. We weren't best friends back then, but and I would always say to him, "You're doing what I want to do. You're doing what I want to do. Like, tell me, share with me." And he was a very generous guy. He was very nice to me. And he said, if you really want to do it, you'll do it someday. But he also said, he gave me some sage words of advice. Take care of yourself when you're on the road. Don't, because it's rough. It's rough on your body. It's rough on your mind. And I saw, what he went through. But I mean, if you go see the Foo Fighters now, like the Madison Square Garden show they just did that was posted on YouTube, you get to see his work. I mean, every night he's out there with them, and everything, the band does in some way or another, he's involved with. So yeah, he's probably, I would say, as far as other directors go, there's one other guy, a gentleman named Paul Dugdale, who is British. who is probably my favorite working director right now on the cinema and live side. He just did a show with Coldplay in Dubai a couple of nights ago. He just did a thing. He does a lot of work with Coldplay and Radiohead and bands like that. His work to me, and it also comes down to he's got a DP named I think it's Brent Turnbull, if I'm getting it right. His DP is amazing, and together the two of them, have made some of the most moving and cinematically interesting things that I've seen in 30, 40 years of looking at live music. And I aspired, if anything, I aspire to be like him. And he's one of those people, I should say, that I met him in person when I was over in Europe, because he was directing the festival and I was directing LCD. And it was one of those things where ships passing in the night, but then I hit him up on social media afterwards. And that's how I've kept in touch with him. And so it's like, social media has been, actually, I should say, it's been great for me in a number of cases, because people that are mentors or people that I look up to, I've been able to reach out to them and discuss with them, various things that interest me and what they're doing, and then how to apply it to what I'm doing.
So to the high school or college kids that are like watching this now, or people right out of college or a few years out of college who like may want to go into live television, whether it's directing or something else, but something within this world, right? What would your advice be to them today?
If you really want to do this, always be shooting, always be creating. Don't ever be home. Always, like, your home is where you sleep and maybe where you eat breakfast, but you're out the rest of the day. Like before I was married, before we had children, I always rented studio apartments, and typically uncomfortable ones, because they were cheap, and then I wouldn't be home. I was always out networking. So if I wasn't out doing something that was if I wasn't out shooting something, I would be out playing an open mic, because I'm a singer-songwriter. I'm an amateur, but I would still go out and I would meet other bands and potential clients that way. So I was always doing something that was adjacent to what I wanted to be doing, to help me or help inform the process of getting to where I needed to be. So for anyone who's out there right now, I mean, you have a cell phone, more than likely. It's got a great camera on it. Exactly. It's like you've got access to technology. And normally, I mean, especially if you're on, I don't know if you're on an iPhone or not, but if you do, you have access to iMovie and it's free. You can start shooting things and editing things right away. You can start making your own soundtrack right away. You can start, and I mean, and this is the important thing. Immediately, like, someone's going to say, but I don't know how, right? Well, I didn't know how. None of us knew how. Some of us went to school, some of us went to work, but the bottom line is that we learned through trial and error. We learned by figuring it out on our own, or, like we've talked about, finding a mentor, the great thing about the online world is that, for example, if you want to shoot like your first music video with an iPhone, you could get on Reddit right now and post in the videography subreddit and say, hey, I'm interested in doing this. This is all I've got. Can someone give me some advice? And boom, I bet within 15 minutes, you'll have 5 answers from people, and some of them will be good. I mean, it's not, it's like, because there are communities of people out there that want to see you succeed, or at least help you succeed. And that's something that, it was more limited when we were starting. When I was starting, we had to seek out, those people much more. There was less availability of, like, I didn't know about film theory until I went to college. I didn't know about film until I shot my first music video with a bunch of friends, and it was on 16 millimeter, Super 16, as a class project. I mean, I didn't know about editing, but it's one of those things where if you really want to do it, then get out and create. And also, I should say, I want to say one other thing is that the advantage or the disadvantage of social media, since it's so prevalent in people's lives, is that it makes you, once you engage with it, it's very performative. It wants you want to feed the beast. And so if you are interested in creating, if you're interested in being a director, it's time to start creating content and then posting it online, posting it to TikTok, posting it to Instagram, posting it and seeing what kind of reaction you get. You know, depending on what your focus is or what you want to create and what kind of reaction you want to get from people, that will dictate, you know, which direction you go to some extent. You know, but it's again, it's like you've got to you just got to go out and create. I mean, that's always the case.
And then for the person who's watching who might be, you know, in their 40s or 50s or even their 60s or maybe even their
Yeah.
70s who
Yeah,
are
yeah, yeah.
watching this thing and they said, you know what, I've always loved watching television and love the whole live television experience. Like maybe this is something a guy can switch to mid-career or late career. What advice would you give them?
Okay, so here's the thing I think is very, very cool about the age we're living in right now. There's this thing called Twitch, which is people in their extra bedroom or their basement or an office broadcasting their lives. And I don't mean that as in a reality show, though I guess it kind of is, but they're broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they're creating a show. They're creating a show about them playing a game, or they're creating a show about talking about music, or they're creating a show about drawing, or they're creating a show about, I would say, you know, if you really want to do something like that, again, the same thing I would say to someone who's younger, take advantage of the phone that's in your pocket, take advantage of the software that's available for free, and start creating your own thing. Now, that's if you want to be a solo, you know, an individual. If you want to be involved with a group of people, or you want to get into broadcasting, or you want to do multi-camera sports, every university in this country now has some sort of video production department for sports. Usually it's buried under the athletic department. I work as a contractor for the University of Wisconsin. I've worked with them since 2003 or so, when they essentially decided they were going to do multi-camera sports production for their in-house scoreboard, you know, because they bought $100 million scoreboard and put it in their football stadium. So they hired me, Daktronics, the contractor, hired me to train a bunch of students on how to do a sports production. And I have people on that. I still go in and I direct things for them from time to time. And I still train people from time to time. And I go in, and there are retirees on our staff. There are guys that were university employees, you know, that are in their 60s who retired, you know, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and they run camera for me, you know, and they run game camera for me. They run tight cam for me. They do hockey. They do basketball. They do women's basketball. They do women's hockey. It's so the thing is that I would say that if you want to be involved and you want to get into multi-camera sports specifically, I would look at your local university athletic department, especially if it's a Big Ten school or a Pac-10 school or one of the major conferences. They're going to have an internal video production department. And nowadays, actually, they don't just have like a scoreboard video broadcast department. They also now have like a cinema department. They've got people running around on cinema cameras shooting all this stuff for social media and for YouTube and stuff like that, which gives you an opportunity to use a cinema camera and go into that whole aesthetic, which is different than the broadcast look. So the opportunities are out there. It's just that you have to know where to look, obviously. And those are my suggestions, at least.
Well, Ken, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about like your career and your history with mentors and, you know, how you feel about the business overall. Before we go, tell everybody about the project we worked on, where they can find a clip of the LCD sound system. What is it, the Christmas song? What do we call this?
Yeah, it's the LCD sound system Christmas special. It is available on Amazon Prime for Amazon Prime customers, or you can look up. They've got 2 clips on YouTube. One is called "Christmas Will Break Your Heart," which is which is the big single from the show, because they'd only released that. They had never played it live before. And then they released another song from the show called "Tonight," which is also on YouTube. So there are 2 clips on YouTube. The whole hour-long show is available on Amazon Prime. It's still up there because I checked the other day. so it's not just holiday specific. I have, if you want to see clips of my work, I'm on IMDb, though that's somewhat incomplete. I have a website. It's at rollittakeit.com, rollittakeit.com. But honestly, where I have most of my information and where I post most frequently is Instagram, my Instagram account, which is roll_it_take_it. It's like they don't let you just do roll it, take it, or roll it, take it was taken already. So that's it. If you type in roll it, take it on Instagram, you'll find me. So,
Cool.
and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has. I'm always available. Always want to help people in the business one way or another, as the best I can.
Well, Ken, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. The audience completely really appreciates it. I want to thank Rivka Rivera, Dan Schneider, the Florence Belsky Charitable Foundation. And folks, if you have any additional questions, you can reach out to me or to Ken. We'll be happy to answer you. So long.